Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sweeney Gray and this is From the South, the evening news brief from Telesur English. We start this new edition right now. At least 8 people have been killed in New York when a van drove several blocks down a bike lane in Lower Manhattan. According to the NYPD, the driver then crashed into a school bus and got out of the car brandishing what turned out to be fake guns. He was shot by police and taken into custody. The mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, called it a terror attack. In the world? Live to New York and our correspondent, Karina Cartagena.
Hello, Sojini.
Hi, Karina. Just describe to us what happened.
Hi, Sojini. How are you? This incident occurred after 3 p.m. in the afternoon. The police of New York respond to reports of gunfire in the area of World Trade Center. According to witnesses, say that the vehicle struck many pedestrians in this area, and the police are still investigating this incident. As you can see right now, there are a lot of police officers in this area, and a few minutes ago, the Mayor Bill de Blasio and the Governor Andrew Cuomo said that 8 people have died and more than 15 people have injured. Right now is a chaos in this area. There are a lot of police all around New York. The authorities increased the security, especially today, because as you know, today is a Halloween day where thousands of people, especially in New York, go out to celebrate this event. Right now, this incident is under investigation. The authorities said that the people have to be careful because we don't know exactly what happened. We know that there is one person in custody of the police, one suspect, and we are expecting more information in the next hours from the Mayor Bill de Blasio and the Governor Andrew Cuomo.
That is Karina Cartagena talking to us live from New York City. This is a fast developing story, so as we get more information, check our website. We will have updates on that particular story. But that was Karina Cartagena in New York giving us a live update there. Campesinos in Cubas State in Colombia say they're facing repression by the ESMAD riot police. The coordinating body of coca growers tweeted, "At this moment, the ESMAD are preparing to attack the mobilized communities in Cofre, Cajabayo in Cauca. We demand guarantees." The mobilizations are part of a national strike that began across Colombia last week. And indigenous groups in Colombia have joined the national strike to ask for the full implementation of the peace agreements and the rights of social leaders. More in this report.
Social protests in Colombia intensifies. Indigenous groups are now joining the Campesinos strike. On Monday, over 100,000 indigenous people started to mobilize peacefully across 24 states of the country to defend peace and ask for the fulfillment of the agreements.
We want to reject the threats that leaders of our people have gotten. They've been targeted and have received death threats, and we call for the indigenous youth to the Colombian youth to maintain this resistance campaign.
So far this year, 133 social leaders have been killed, 40 of whom were indigenous. Threats and intimidations from paramilitary groups are also adding up to these crimes, as well as the stigmatization of indigenous communities who are only defending their territories by the police.
The human rights situation we're going through, this year they killed 40 leaders, 10 just this month, in different regions of the country. This means that this war continues for the indigenous people. The armed conflict remains.
Under the government of President Juan Manuel Santos, the indigenous people have signed 1,300 agreements with the national government to guarantee their cultural survival and the lives of the villagers. Even when the Constitutional Court warned that 36 indigenous people were in danger because of the difficult realities that their territories face, the national government hasn't fulfilled any of the agreements.
No podemos tener solamente acuerdos.
We can't just have agreements on paper and not live up to the words. Word is sacred for us as indigenous people. That's why we're all here together for everyone to join us in this struggle that affects all Colombians.
The indigenous peoples showed their solidarity with the struggle of the Campesinos and Afro-descendants who were asking for continued protest action against the forced eradication of illegal crops, and for the government to restart the voluntary substitution and the integral rural reform, which were all part of the peace agreement. The indigenous groups sent a clear message to the national government and Colombian society. They said, "Count on us for peace, but never for the war."
Our correspondent in Colombia, Lorena Hoyos, has the details.
Compañeros, buenas tardes. It's been 8 days since the start of the strike by campesinos in different parts of Colombia. So far, there hasn't been an answer from the government to the demands of the citizens. The only answer received so far has been violent repression in some areas and the presence of the security forces. We are joined by Olga Quintero, one of the leaders of the Catatumbo Campesinos. Olga, what is the current outlook for the national strike?
The situation at the moment is complicated because we have been waiting for an answer from the Colombian government. We are hoping for a positive response to exhaust all dialogue options and for them to meet our demands. They have wanted to portray this as a cocalero strike. It isn't that. It's an integral strike in the face of the need for guarantees for social leaders and their regions. The topic of guarantees for the implementation of the Havana Accords and obviously the topic of illicit crops. Because while communities willingly sign agreements to substitute these crops, the Ministry of Defense comes in and violently eradicates them. This generates clashes, and that's why we say it's necessary to address the topic of implementing the accords in an integral way, so that all of them are connected and a real impact can be made.
Although Dominica is still recovering from the brutal effects of Hurricane Maria, the island is going ahead with its independence celebrations on November 3rd. Electricity has still not been fully restored and some roads remain impassable. But the Minister for Social Services said that Dominica is a resilient country and that, albeit a shortened version of past celebrations, the show will go on.
The easiest thing we could do at this time is to say no celebration. But we are not daunted. We still believe in nation building. We still believe in building a Dominica, a future for the younger generations. And so we cannot let 39 years of independence pass us by because of our situation now.
And Trinidad and Tobago will receive just over $7 million because of the excess rainfall policy the government took out earlier this year with the CCRIF. Heavy rainfall between October 18th and 20th caused extreme flooding in South and East Trinidad. This is the first year the government has taken out this particular policy with the regional insurance facility. The amount does not cover the full cost of recovery from the flood damage. And the US-based Federal Bureau of Investigations was apparently really interested in the outcome of the Trinidad and Tobago elections in 1959. The website Muckrock has released FBI memos revealing that the Bureau was looking for compromising material on Eric Williams. It tweeted US government feared Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister had an anti-white complex because he snubbed them at parties. His party did win those elections, and the following year, upon independence from Britain, he became the first Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. More news in a minute. Stay with us. Over 20,000 people from the homeless workers movement took to the streets of Sao Paulo in Brazil. The homeless workers marched 23 kilometers in a historic demonstration to demand their right for proper housing. They want a solution to the economic crisis and the restoration of the housing programs that Temer's government has cut.
We have walked for more than 3 hours now. We continue to struggle. We will arrive to No Fear town.
Wall or in boxes. Our reporter Nacho Limas has more from Sao Paulo, Brazil.
At this moment, the March of the Homeless Workers Movement, MTST, continues starting in the occupation Pueblo Sin Miedo, which has 7,500 families. They're headed to the Sao Paulo government palace to demand proper housing, all in the midst of the economic crisis Brazil faces. With over 13 million unemployed people and a minimum salary that is not enough to pay for rent, these people bemoan the fact that they have nowhere to live in. And that's why they march to demand the government of the state of Sao Paulo restore the right for housing for these people, and that the de facto government of Temer restore the housing programs, such as Mina Casa Mina Vida, that had been started by the government of Dilma Rousseff. The march will be long. It will take 23 kilometers to reach the Sao Paulo government palace.
Naturally, Miss in Brazil. The Miss Peru beauty pageant is making headlines after the 23 candidates shared statistics about femicide and gender violence when asked for their body measurements.
My name is Camila Canicova and I represent the Department of Lima. My figures are 2,202 cases of reported feminicides in the past 9 years in my country.
My name is Karen Cueto and I represent Lima, and my figures are 82 femicides and 156 attempted femicides so far this year.
After their presentation, the host of the contest explained that this year, the show is going to dedicate itself to sending a message about the fight to end violence against women, a rising problem in the country. Just this year, Peru has registered more than 6,000 cases of sexual violence and 59 femicides. In Caracas, Venezuela, President Maduro has approved a new injection of resources of 1.7 trillion bolivares to help local and regional government function better. At a government meeting with the recently elected state governors, Maduro approved the new funds and also assigned 400 billion bolivares to boost workers' wages. The announcement comes as Venezuela prepares for municipal elections in December. The president also said that the federal government should be a space for political dialogue to solve differences. The three opposition parties have said they will boycott those local elections. Our correspondent Reagan Devines joins us live from Caracas. Hello, Reagan. President Maduro is again talking dialogue. Any chance that can happen?
Hi. Yeah, we are seeing bits and pieces of this coming out of the news more and more. He had stated before the regional elections a few weeks ago that he wanted to continue dialogue with the opposition. They've been talking throughout the year, mostly in secret, so we don't have a lot of details on exactly what the points were. But he did mention recently that some 95% of the points of the dialogue talk, of the peace talks, were agreed to by both parties, and that they are close to signing a deal. We're not sure exactly what this deal is going to look like, what the points entail. We do have a sense of exactly what the opposition wants. They literally just want, well, vocally they said they want the government change. They want intervention by the U.S. to help them get this done. They've been getting help from people like regionally from the OAS, Luis Almagro. They want at all costs that Maduro leaves office, but we're not sure exactly what this desire, how this desire has influenced the peace talks. Maduro said he wants to focus on economic recovery, and he's doing so, as you just mentioned, with this economic assistance, financial assistance to regions and governorships and municipalities. And of course, the upcoming municipal elections in December he will use his resources to help those regardless of political affiliation. The CNE today said that, well, yesterday they had initiated the nomination process. Today they said 95 parties are ready to be and legally ready to take part in the municipal elections, 22 national parties and 73 regional parties. And so we are looking closely at exactly what is going to come out of these peace talks. We're still waiting to get details from them. They're very important, obviously, because we're getting so much differences in perspectives, especially when it comes to this coalition of the MOD coalition of different opposition parties. You hear one party or several parties saying that no, we don't want peace talks, we just want them out of office, we will go to the streets. And on the other side of the equation, you don't hear much, but you hear in the news that they've gone to peace talks. Recently, last week, they had the last round of peace talks in the Dominican Republic, and members of a party that says that they will not participate in the municipal elections were at the peace talks. And members of this party are requesting that their supporters go back out in the streets and hit the pavements, and are requesting international pressure on Maduro's government. So we're not too sure exactly what is coming out of the peace talks or exactly what direction peace talks are going in, Soini.
Thank you so much for that update, Regan Devines. That is Regan Devines in our Telestio offices in Venezuela. In Bolivia, leaders from different social sectors are supporting an appeal to the Constitutional Court to enable President Evo Morales to stand again in the 2019 presidential elections. Details in this report.
The initiative to use all constitutional and democratic means to allow President Evo Morales to stand as a candidate for re-election came from the social movements that support the Bolivian government.
This is heading to the polls regardless. I don't understand what their fear is. What concerns the opposition so much that they keep asking, why is he still involved? He's never going to leave? That is not going to happen. Our president subjects himself to democracy, and the Bolivian people will choose at the polls.
The minimum wage used to be $65 or 444 Bolivianos. Imagine that. Nowadays, the minimum wage is nearly $300.
The initiative is supported by rural and indigenous communities who have benefited by President Morales' decade-long administration.
I live in a rural area. In the past, no president ever visited us, but then we got support for children, for women, and for senior citizens.
We finally have Entel telephone towers. We have production projects. We have different social housing projects for the communities. All of these were unheard of during the neoliberal era.
Trade unions, too, believe the political process started by this administration, known as the process of change. It must not be cut short.
President Evo does not take a day off. He is working day and night, 365 days a year. So how could the people not notice the kind of dedication he has for his work? Therefore, the people say President Morales must stay and govern.
Today there's a new generation and many new leaders who will not be fooled. This is our process. Why must we let him go? We have to consolidate this process with participation from the country's entire worker movement.
A group of legislators from the ruling movement towards socialism have proposed that the Constitutional Court declared void the current rules that limit the consecutive re-election of government officials. The court will issue its ruling before the end of the year.
The Argentine Indigenous leader and lawmaker Milagro Sala has been taken to hospital after denouncing the deplorable conditions in prison. The activist and leader of the Tupac Amaru movement had been asking to be transferred to a hospital for several weeks, but her request had been denied. Sala is suffering bad health and depression. She accuses the state of targeting her and others for their role in fighting for indigenous land rights. And we have a special report from Argentina on this very story.
This morning, Milagro Sala, the member of the Parla Sur, was taken from the women's prison of Alto Comedero to a private hospital where she is set to undergo a number of tests. Milagro was asking for this even before she was moved to prison after the arbitrary decision of the judge in charge of her case. The leader suffers from irritable bowel syndrome, dizziness, and headaches. Let's remember that judge in her case canceled her house arrest after saying she did not take enough care of her health, although she refused to be moved to a clinic since she wasn't notified about this happening at the time. The results on the medical examination will decide whether she has to remain in the hospital or if she goes back to prison.
And that was Sabrina Segovia reporting from Jujuy. And thousands of Argentinians have taken to the streets of Buenos Aires to protest against President Mauricio Macri's announcement of new labor, tax and pension reforms. With the slogan, "We want to know what it's about," the protesters were met with a large-scale security operation with over 400 police officers deployed. The protest came after a press conference where Macri announced his reform plans before businessmen, trade unionists, and government and opposition governors. President Macri presented his package as the basis for the second phase of his administration. Let's take a look at what these measures entail.
In an effort to deepen his neoliberal policies, President Mauricio Macri presented his new measures, which will occur in the next few months. He outlined his retirement plans and tax reforms for the next 2 years.
We need to advance the reforms, where everybody will start by giving a little bit. First, those with power. And I'm not talking about political power only. I'm not saying that it's easy. Change costs. But there are no excuses not to try. There's no excuses. It's now or never.
The ceremony took place with around 150 guests, among them governors, union leaders, business and judges. Macri anticipated a projected reform that includes raising the retirement age, as well as a labor reform with the main objective of changing the collective labor agreements.
There are a lot of things that Argentina needs to achieve, but I don't agree with many of the government's plans with his economic roadmap. It's getting closer to those mistakes we already made in the past.
During Mauricio Macri's event, the voice of social movements was absent. However, they made their voice heard outside the building. There's concern among poorer sectors that claim that the new measures will affect them even more.
It's a meeting without the people, without poor people. They're discussing several reforms behind people's backs, like cutting back and advancing in measures that are really bad for the society. We've got to have a social agenda, which is absent from this space.
Macri's government has started a period of reforms, looking for general support for his public policies that will allow him to deepen neoliberal policies that he has been carrying out since he took power on December 2015.
Cuba's 35th annual International Trade Fair has opened in Havana, with the country's trade minister saying foreign investment is already up this year and more deals could be signed before the year is out. With more than 3,400 companies from some 70 countries participating in the fair, known as the FIHAV 2017. Foreign investment is especially important for the island now, given that the drop in oil shipments to Cuba from Venezuela, along with heightened tensions with the United States under President Donald Trump and the damage from Hurricane Irma this summer. Back in a minute, stay with us. U.S. President Donald Trump has distanced himself from a junior foreign policy advisor who admitted to lying about a meeting with an alleged Russian agent during last year's presidential campaign. Trump declared George Papadopoulos as low-level and a liar. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov described the allegations of Russian meddling in the U.S. elections as tiresome.
Without a single piece of proof, we are, as you know, being accused of meddling not only in the U.S. election, but also in those in European states. Recently, there was an allegation that Moscow decided what minister to appoint in South Africa. In general, there is no limit to fantasy.
Catalonia's ousted leader Carles Puigdemont says he is not seeking asylum in Belgium. after Spain's state prosecutor recommended charges for rebellion and sedition be brought against him. However, at a news conference in Brussels, Puigdemont said he would return to Catalonia when given guarantees by the Spanish government. And now here's a roundup of the other stories making headlines around the world.
Kenya's opposition leader Raila Odinga has vowed not to accept the outcome of the presidential re-election. Odinga said he will not challenge the election results in court, but has promised a campaign of civil disobedience and peaceful protest. Odinga's party NASA plans to set up a National People's Assembly comprising of civil rights leaders and labor unions, among others, to press for fresh elections.
If election is allowed to stand, the highest office in the land will be occupied by a person who has usurped power. We in NASA are resolute that this sham election cannot and will not be allowed to stand. We will not allow two megalomaniacs to destroy the dream of freedom and democracy that generations have sacrificed and worked so hard for. We shall see to it that we conduct a free, fair and credible presidential election as ordered by the Supreme Court.
Refugee advocates have protested in Australia against unsafe conditions for asylum seekers at a remote Papua New Guinea camp that is due to be closed. Detainees refuse to leave the camp, citing safety fears. Activists fear authorities will use force to eject the asylum seekers.
Immediately, there is no safety for the asylum seekers and refugees who are on Manus Island. They're at risk of actually being brutalised in terms of the use of force against them to drive them out of the detention centre. They're at risk if they are relocated to other areas on Manus Island because they will be defenceless. There is no security.
At least 4 people were killed when a teenage suicide bomber blew himself up in Kabul's diplomatic quarter. At least 8 others were wounded, but the number of dead and injured is expected to rise. According to a spokesman for Kabul's police, the bomber was thought to be as young as 12 or 13 years old. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for the attack. The controversial trial of staff from Turkey's main opposition daily newspaper has resumed. The staff are on trial on terror-related charges in a case seen as a test for media freedom under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The 17 defendants risk up to 43 years in prison if convicted. Dozens of demonstrators gathered outside the court in Istanbul to show their support for the accused.
We're calling for the judges in this case and in the cases of all journalists to do their duty and to uphold the rule of law and freedom of expression in Turkey and to release these journalists.
Japanese police have found 9 bodies, including 2 with their heads severed, dumped in a cool box in an apartment in the Tokyo suburbs. Police confirmed they arrested 27-year-old Takashiro Shiraishi, who lives in the apartment. Authorities had been investigating the disappearance of a 23-year-old woman and discovered a connection between her and Shiraishi.
We've come to the end of this evening's news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, tellusyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.